dashing. He had that mischievous factor about him that always had you on the edge of his seat wondering what he was going to be up to next.
Oh, one of the all-time greats, isn't he? No doubt about it.
Denis Law was someone special. You never get people like Denis Law. He was absolutely, I would think, probably one of the greatest players inside the box.
Denis Law died at 84. The news came on 17th of January 2025, bringing an end to a life that had stretched from wartime Aberdeen to the glittering heights of European football and finally to a quiet battle with dementia. His family said he'd fought hard, but at last he was at peace. For those who loved him, the relief was mixed with sorrow because the man who had once commanded stadiums with fearless grace had spent his final years watching his own memory slip away. But how did a barefoot boy from one of Scotland's poorest streets become the only Scottish footballer ever to win the Ballon d'Or? Denis Law was born on 24th of February 1940 in the middle of a world war into a family that knew hunger more intimately than comfort. His father, George Law, was a fisherman, and the North Sea gave and took as it pleased. Sometimes there was food, sometimes there wasn't. The Law family lived in a cramped council flat at Printfield Terrace in Aberdeen's Woodside district. Denis was the youngest of 7 children, 4 boys and 3 girls, and space was scarce. So was money, so was everything. The flat was damp and overcrowded, 9 people sharing rooms where privacy was impossible. When his father's fishing nets came up empty, the family went without. When storms rolled in and the boats couldn't launch, there was no income. This wasn't temporary hardship. It was the constant rhythm of their lives, a relentless grind that shaped every decision, every meal, every morning. His mother, Rabina, fought a daily battle of attrition just to feed and clothe the children. He went barefoot until he was 12 years old, not by choice, but because shoes cost money his family didn't have. Walking the rough, cobbled streets of Aberdeen without shoes would have altered his body in ways that later served him well. His feet grew strong, his balance acute, his connection to the ground tactile and immediate. Between the ages of 12 and 14, he wore thin canvas plimsolls that offered little protection from the cold granite streets or the impact of a football. At 14, he finally got his first proper pair of shoes, but even those were hand-me-downs from his older brothers, worn and shaped by someone else's feet. He didn't own football boots until he was 16, a gift from a neighbour named George Geddes who saw the boy's talent and wanted to help. This was the world that built Denis Law. It was hard, relentless and unforgiving, but it also taught him to fight for every inch, to make do with nothing, and to never take a single moment of grace for granted. In the tenements of Aberdeen, survival was the primary measure of success. Everything else was luxury. Without a leather football, which cost a week's wages, Denis improvised. He scrunched up old newspapers into a tight ball, tied it with string or rags, and hung it from the clothes pulley in the kitchen or a hook in the tenement hallway. Then he would jump over and over, heading the swinging paper ball, raising it higher each time. This crude training device became the foundation of his aerial ability. Years later, he would outjump defenders a foot taller than him, timing his headers with a precision that seemed impossible. That skill was born in poverty, perfected in a cramped hallway where hitting the granite walls meant pain. In those narrow confines, avoiding the jagged walls whilst leaping for a swinging target required a spatial awareness that no academy could teach. He was learning to control his body in tight spaces, a skill that would define his penalty box prowess. The technique he developed would become his trademark, the source of countless goals, the reason fans would chant his name. The irony is cruel. The very technique that lifted him out of hardship would, decades later, be linked to the dementia that stole his mind. But Denis faced another challenge, one that should have ended his football career before it began. He had strabismus, a condition where his eyes didn't align properly. One eye looked straight, the other wandered. At Kitty Brewster Primary School, the other children called him Cockeye. The bullying was relentless. He was given thick NHS glasses, heavy and fragile, the kind people called jam jar bottoms, but he couldn't wear them during football. Without them, his vision was chaotic. He saw double, or the ball's path blurred into confusion. So Denis adapted. He closed one eye. He played the entire game using monocular vision, relying on just one eye to judge distance, speed, and trajectory. For most people, this would make timing a volley or a header nearly impossible. Depth perception relies on both eyes working together. But Denis's brain compensated. He learned to read the ball through movement, through the way it shifted against the background, through the size of its image on his retina, through instinct honed by necessity. His brain was forced to over-rely on monocular cues, teaching itself a different way to see the game. When Huddersfield Town scouted him at 14, their manager, Andy Beattie, was blunt in his assessment. He called Denis a freak and said he'd never seen a less likely football prospect. The boy was weak, puny, and wore thick glasses, but the club signed him anyway, and they did something that changed everything. They paid for corrective surgery in a hospital in Aberdeen. For the first time in his life, Denis could see the world through two aligned eyes. He later said the surgery did wonders for his self-confidence. The transformation was immediate. The freak became a predator. By 1962, Denis Law had joined Manchester United for a British record fee of £115,000. He had played successfully for Huddersfield, then Manchester City for a record fee, and then Torino in Italy, where the defensive style frustrated his attacking instincts. The club was still rebuilding from the devastation of the 1958 Munich air disaster, and Law became a symbol of its resurrection. He became known as the king of the Stretford end, not just for the goals he scored, but for how he scored them. He played with a crackling mix of aggression and style, fearless in his willingness to throw himself into challenges that would make modern players flinch. The fans saw in him a reflection of their own lives, the grit and determination of working-class Manchester. He wasn't polished or distant. He was one of them. His style was distinctive. He scored with back heels, bicycle kicks, and diving headers. He fought for every ball as if his life depended on it, because in his mind, shaped by the poverty of his childhood, perhaps it did. He understood what it meant to have nothing, and he played as though every goal might be his last chance to prove he belonged. His background in the Aberdeen tenements showed in his willingness to fight for every ball, often recklessly throwing his body into challenges that spoke of a hunger deeper than sport. In 1964, Denis won the Ballon d'Or, the award for the best footballer in Europe. To this day, he remains the only Scottish player ever to achieve this. He formed the Holy Trinity with George Best and Bobby Charlton, a trio immortalised in a statue outside Old Trafford. Together, they defined an era. Charlton was the stoic English gentleman, the survivor of Munich, the leader. Best was the Irish genius, the pop star, the celebrity. Law was the Scottish warrior, the sharp-witted instigator, the executioner. They represented the full spectrum of British football identity, and together they made Manchester United a force that could challenge anyone. Denis scored 237 goals in 404 appearances for Manchester United, making him the third highest scorer in the club's history. For Scotland, he netted 30 goals, making him joint all-time top scorer alongside Kenny Dalglish. These numbers tell part of the story, but they don't capture the complete picture. They don't show the bravery, the defiance, the refusal to be beaten by circumstances that should have crushed him. But there was tragedy even in his glory. In 1974, playing for Manchester City, Denis scored a backheel goal against his beloved Manchester United. He believed, mistakenly as it turned out, that his goal had relegated United. He didn't celebrate. He walked off the pitch with his head bowed, was substituted immediately, and effectively retired from top-level club football in that moment. "I have seldom felt so depressed," he later said. The king had, in his mind, struck the final blow to his own kingdom. It was a moment that haunted him, a twist of fate that felt almost Shakespearean in its cruelty. As Denis aged, the invincibility of his youth began to crack. In 2003, at 63, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He underwent major surgery to remove the prostate gland and recovered, using his experience to encourage other men to seek screening. A statement from Manchester United at the time noted he was in very good spirits in hospital. He turned his trauma into public service, speaking openly about a disease many men feared to acknowledge. His openness helped countless men face their own health with courage. Then, in August 2016, something more ominous happened. Denis collapsed at Manchester Airport whilst travelling to Menorca with his wife, Diana. He reportedly turned white and told his wife he didn't feel well before blacking out completely in his seat. He was rushed to Trafford General Hospital. He later admitted he thought he'd snuffed it. Doctors diagnosed a vasovagal episode, a sudden drop in heart rate and blood pressure that reduces blood flow to the brain. It wasn't immediately life-threatening, but it hinted at deeper vascular issues, problems with blood flow to the brain. It was a warning, the first public crack in the granite. In August 2021, the warning became reality. Denis Law announced he had been diagnosed with mixed dementia, a combination of Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia. The dual diagnosis was particularly cruel. Alzheimer's attacks memory and thought, caused by the accumulation of amyloid plaques in the brain. Vascular dementia results from poor blood flow to the brain, often caused by tiny, unnoticed strokes or vessel damage. Given his history of vasovagal issues, the vascular component made sense. His body's support systems were failing him, but it was the cause that Denis confronted with raw honesty. "What else would it be?" he said. "That was what caused damage to the brain. You didn't think about it. We just thought it was normal." He was talking about heading. The leather footballs of his era were heavy when dry and became waterlogged, soaking up water like a sponge and turning into rock-hard projectiles when wet. Denis had spent his career perfecting his heading technique, meeting the ball with force thousands upon thousands of times. The skill that defined him, the paper ball training in the tenement, likely destroyed him. His public statement was heartbreaking in its simplicity. "I recognize how my brain is deteriorating and how my memory evades me when I don't want it to, and how this causes me distress in situations that are beyond my control." The man who had once controlled space and time on the pitch was losing control of his own mind. He spoke of the long periods of isolation during the COVID-19 pandemic, how the months alone had accelerated his decline. For dementia sufferers, social stimulation is vital, and the lockdowns stripped that away. He retired from public life. He hung up his autograph pen, as he put it. "I hung up my football boots a long time ago, and now it's time to put my signing days behind me," he said. His daughter, Denis Law, became the public face of his battle, raising money for the Alzheimer's Society and offering glimpses of the good days and bad days. She organised fundraising walks, including the Thames Bridges Trek, turning her father's suffering into a force for awareness and change. In November 2021, a statue of Denis was unveiled in Aberdeen. He attended the ceremony, flanked by Sir Alex Ferguson. It was his last major public appearance. He stood smiling, immortalised in bronze, even as his flesh and mind faded. On 17th of January 2025, Denis Law passed away at the age of 84. His family statement was simple but heavy with meaning. "It is with a heavy heart that we tell you our father, Denis Law, has sadly passed away. He fought a tough battle, but finally he is now at peace." His funeral, held on 11th of February 2025, was a state occasion for football. The funeral procession began at Old Trafford. The hearse arrived at 1:10 p.m, driving slowly down Sir Matt Busby Way before stopping at the Holy Trinity statue. Denis was the last of the three to die. George Best in 2005, Bobby Charlton in 2023. The moment allowed for a spiritual reunion in the shadow of the stadium they had built together. Thousands lined the streets. Flowers, scarves and tributes carpeted the forecourt. Flags flew at half-mast. As the procession moved, Flower of Scotland played, a haunting reminder that though Denis was Manchester's king, he was Scotland's son. For a man who had left Aberdeen at 15 but never lost his accent or his identity, this was a poignant tribute. The service at Manchester Cathedral was attended by the elite of football, including Sir Alex Ferguson, visibly moved, and the current United manager, Ruben Amorim, bridging the gap between Law's history and the club's present. The eulogies spoke not just of the footballer, but of the man, his humour, his kindness to staff, his devotion to his wife Diana. Denis Law's life is a story of triumph and cost. He rose from barefoot poverty to win the Ballon d'Or, playing with one eye closed, heading paper balls in a tenement hallway. He became a legend, the king of Old Trafford, adored by millions. But the game took its price. The heading that made him great likely caused the dementia that unmade him. His death serves as a sombre reminder of the human cost of glory. He joined a tragic list of 1960s icons, including Nobby Stiles, Jack Charlton, Martin Peters, and Ray Wilson, all of whom suffered from dementia. Their brilliance came at a price the sport is only now beginning to acknowledge. When he died, Denis Law was released from the confusion of a deteriorating mind. He left behind a legacy that cannot be diminished. The boy with the squint became the best player in Europe. The barefoot child walked among kings. The tragedy of his end does not erase the triumph of his life. It merely makes him human, and he remains forever the king of the Stretford End.